Hey guys, and welcome to a showdown between two mighty competitors who we've had on the channel before. On the left hand side we have Wei leading the forces of the DAWI up against Blitzen and his Dark Elf legions. Should be a really fun game on quite a horrible map. This is one of my least favourite maps actually on rotation at the moment in quick battles, but I wanted to showcase this battle because it has an awesome rush DAWI build. So let's hop in here and I'll take a little look at the forces. So we have Dwarf Warriors dotted all the way along the front line. Of course these guys are relatively cheap and grumpy, here to try to settle some grudges. They're not going to beat anyone really in melee, as in, destroy a front line or really hack the enemy elite troops apart, but they are numerous and relatively tanky themselves. On either flank they are going to be supported by some giant slayers, one on either side, who will be operating as some almost DAWI cavalry. I've spoken quite a lot about these guys in the past and my love for them, and now they've been buffed up as well. Really decent mass helps them pin in enemy chariots. In the secondary battle line we do have a ton of miners, including the Ekrund miners. These guys will help support the Dwarf Warriors and enable them to beat back that Dark Elf front line, and I really like using miners in a secondary formation like this. It ensures they get all of those blasts and charges up and over, and that will allow the Dwarf Warriors to shred Bleak Swords and Dread Spears alike. In the centre portion of the build here, we do have a nice little hero core. We have a Belegar Ironhammer, and it looks like he's actually going to be bringing the Hammer of Angrund, which is pretty cool because we normally see Belegar just completely naked. And this does turn him into a little bit of a beast, at least for a while. That actually has a constant effect. That's quite nice. We also have Felix supporting him, the greatest manlin in the eyes of the DAWI. Of course, he is going to be healing up Belegar with that Blood Oath, but also comes in as well with his magical sword, which turns him into an absolute infantry slayer. In the back line, we do have a couple of slayers as well, one of the basic variety, and the other one being the Dragon Back Slayers. And then we have the Scolder Guard. They were a highlight unit on one of my recent replays. Really awesome regiment of renowned Iron Drakes, who can be a little bit tricky to use because their firing arc is so horrific. Now for the forces of the Dark Elves here, more of a traditional approach, going for no chariots, however, which is really rare up against the Dwarfs. But apart from that, 4 Reaper Bolt Throwers, who may struggle a little bit up on this map. As you can see, there's many dips and hills and so forth to kind of block a line of sight. For the front line, we do have Black Ark Corsairs, who are anti-infantry. Very interested to see how they perform today. And in the centre, we do have the Blades of the Blood Queen, regiment of renowned executioners, leading a hero core here of a Canaanite assassin, Lokir Fellheart, who's of course going to bring in all his lovely buffs. If we take a quick look, he has the Dreaded Duelist, he has Helm of the Kraken, and Merciless Slaver. And they're going to be supported by a Sorceress of Dark Magic, simply coming in with Soul Stealer. In the back lines, we do have some Dark Shards as well. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 units to be precise. Dark Shards, of course, armor piercing. Crossbowmen, always going to be quite good up against the Dwarfs. These guys as well are shielded, so they'll be able to counter skirmish fire the enemy relatively effectively. But it looks like the Dark Elves are going to push up. Trying to take this hill here would be quite a nice position for them. You can protect your flank with this mountain up on the right hand side and allow the bolt throwers to really rain down fire. But one big problem the bolt throwers are going to have here is, what do they target? I mean, everything's relatively inexpensive. You can attack the Scolder Guard, but then you're simply going to get swarmed by the mass of DAWI tide coming towards you. So maybe softening up the miners wouldn't be the worst idea, as those blasting charges are going to wreak havoc on this front line, which needs to hold, because a lot of the value in this Dark Elf build is, of course, going to be coming from the Dark Shards and the Bolt Throwers. Looks like the army taking a relatively defensive position here, not quite covering the flank fully, but we'll have to see if they do advance. And the DAWI hordes are starting to push up now. Giant Slayers can be taken to the trees, it would seem, to try and loop up and around, perhaps around this path, to scoot into that back line, which will force some of the Black Ark Corsairs to commit backwards, something they don't want to do, of course. Bolt Throwers are unleashing hell, and trying to focus target Felix isn't the worst idea. He is only a human after all, not the hugest amount of armor or leadership. But it looks like the Bolt Throwers now are switching to that scatter shot, and they're shooting into the back lines, trying to target down the Scolder Guard, as well as some of these miners. But they're not really doing too much damage out of the gate. A couple of blasts managed to hit them. The Dwarfs, heavily armoured, stout folk, should be able to survive 1 or 2 volleys, as the DAWI tide does advance. It's so weird seeing the Dwarfs being forced forward like this. I do like the defensive approach from the Dark Elves, but yeah, you need to commit some Black Arks down into these woods, I think, to try and protect the flank. And on the other side, we have some Slayers, as well as Giant Slayers, being used as cavalry, whipping around, going to start pressurising the Bolt Throws as well as the Dark Shards. The rest of the Dwarf Horde is taking consistent damage now on the approach in. You can see these Dwarf Warriors have taken a bit, and so have the Scolder Guard, but they're going to be switching formation to that thin line, making them far, far harder to actually kind of whittle down and tank. In the distance in the trees, looks like the Slayers are now in position and hidden, so the Dark Elf player does not know they're there if he didn't spot them moving there early on. Dragonback Slayers and Giant Slayers are whipping around this side, and because they don't really have any large targets like Hydras or anything to attack, it is a good idea to try and pressure these bolt throws as well as the Dark Shards where possible. Dwarfs just chilling for now, taking a ton of shots, so it looks like the hill is saving them quite a bit in that department. Miners of Blast and Charges now the focus of attention as Felix and Belegar do start to lead the charge, and in come the Dark Shards fire, shooting into those Miners with Blast and Charges in the secondary line, but it's going to be a little bit too little too late. They're certainly going to get off all their Blast and Charges onto these Black Ark Corsairs, getting some lovely value and friendly fire at the same time. Up in the hills here, we do have the Giant Slayers, who have been caught here by some Black Ark Corsairs. They are desperately trying to push their way through, as another unit of Slayers has managed to dart onto the Reaper Bolt Thrower there. Lovely positioning, and on the right-hand side, we have a ton of Dwarfs marching through the woods, turning into the Wood Elves, and starting to pressure Black Ark Corsairs with the Giant Slayers, allowing the Dragonbacks to whip up and around. There's simply not enough to protect this Dark Elf back line, but how are they faring in the front line? Dwarf Warriors have started to break through Black Ark Corsairs. We're taking a huge punishment in order to do so. In the centre portion, though, the Blades of the Blood Queen dealing some damage, but at the same time, taking a ton. One thing that's going really badly, though, for the forces of the DAWI is the K-Knight Assassin, as well as Loki, have popped on top of Felix. Assassin's Trophies has gone down, and this leadership fight is certainly going to be going Dark Elf favoured. Felix is certain to die here unless he manages to fall back and retreat, and that will leave Belegar nice and isolated, and it looks like Felix has been forced off, but Dwarf Warriors have forced their way through the front line, and Slayers have now pushed onto the Reaper Bolt Throwers. More Blast and Charges being covered in, doing a lovely ton of friendly fire, but also doing some damage to the Dark Elves. Up on the side, Slayers were finally caught by Black Ark Corsairs, who will be able to dice them up quite nicely, but Dwarf Warriors are starting to push through, and you can see the Dark Elf position is looking really shaky right now. So many of their forces having to fall back through the trees, but the Dwarfs are having to sacrifice their leadership core here in order to obtain this. Blades of the Blood Queen desperately trying to chase down some Miners. They will eventually be able to catch them, you would think, but they are now turning back to engage in the front line fight as those bolt throws continue to rain fire down, forcing off units left, right, and centre, but they themselves are pretty much done at this point. Black Ark Corsairs are going to be doing well up against Giant Slayers, but elsewhere, Reaper Bolt Throwers are in full retreat, as well as these Dark Shards trying to flee, but there is no safety for them. That is the problem. If they can fall back perhaps to this unit of Black Ark Corsairs to pin in the enemy, and then kite the Dwarfs is a way back into this for the force of the Dark Elves, as they have successfully here managed to finish off Belegar as well, who's currently routing and running for his life. Blades of the Blood Queen, though, taking some damage from the Skulder Guard, who, after taking some initial punishment, have managed to come back into the game, shooting uphill into the elite infantry. Only 20 kills on these bad boys so far, as all of a sudden bolt throws do start to rain hell upon them once more. Belegar is fleeing, tactically withdrawing, we'll say, actually, as he's a mighty dwarf here. The K-Knight Assassin is going to be able to chase him down, but Dwarf Warriors trying to rush in and intercept. Lovely play there by Way, and the Blades of the Blood Queen at this point are incredibly beat up, although they do break the central portion here of the DAWI force. Up in the trees, Dragonback Slayers are now being used to chase down the Dark Shards, and using the Slayers is far better than the Dwarf Warriors, of course, because Slayers are much faster and able to catch such units. These Dark Shards have been saved, though, by some Black Ark Corsairs, who will be able to finish off these Giant Slayers and allow this secondary unit of Dark Elves to fire in and start whittling down the DAWI advance. But a bit of a misplay coming in, I think, with the Sorcerer of Dark Magic here, enabling her to be caught, but again, he does manage to escape here and pop a fat Soul Stealer, catching 2 units here, Dwarf Warriors and Slayers. In the distance, it looks like some more Dwarf Warriors are pushing back these Dark Shards. The second unit needs to try and flee in a different direction, kind of flee downhill, and then counter shoot in where possible. Sorcerer Dark is still alive, got some Black Ark Corsairs rallying as well in the central portion, but it looks like the reserves of the Dwarf forces have managed to surround Loki Felhar, although he is incredibly tanky with that Kraken Helm. Not doing too bad a job as well, just mopping up and distracting so many Dwarf units. In the distance, that Assassin is still going strong after that Belegar booty, trying to hunt him down. It looks like 340 health. He should be finished off before he makes it off the edge of the battlefield, which would be a real nice boon for the Dark Elves, who are struggling in all other departments. As you can see, Dark Shards simply slowly getting caught here by some Slayers who are approaching, as well as Giant Slayers. You can flee the Warriors, but you cannot flee the Slayers. In the distance, a similar situation is happening as the Dark Shards actually running down to the beach here, trying to get back into their long ships where they, I assume they raided this land from. Dragonback Slayers will be able to catch them, however, which is a little bit of a disaster, as Black Ark Corsairs got tied up with Dwarf Warriors instead of their Slayer targets they really want to get onto here. So also Dark Magic is being finished off and clubbed to death by Ekrund Miners, not a way any elf would like to go. But it looks like Belegar has been finally assassinated, and the Skulder Guard are unleashing hell upon Loki Felhart. although also doing some lovely friendly fire to these miners. Going to be getting some pretty nice consistent damage. Loki, he probably wants to turn, rush uphill, and try to finish these guys off as quickly as possible. But the problem for the Dark Elves is, yes, they've won the hero fight here, but Dwarfs pretty damn good leadership all round anyway. They've managed to break down the kite of the Dark Elves. You can see in all areas the DAWI have managed to catch the Elven forces, and it is going to be Loki versus the world. Now, Loki is incredibly tanky, but this is a lot of heavily armoured dwarfs to try and deal with. He has managed to pop on top of the Skulder Guard, who will be able to flee backwards, using the protection of the Dwarf Warriors as a bit of a shield, and any shots they can get into Loki will certainly be welcomed, I'm sure. Ekron Miners unleashing some more blasting charges onto the Black Orc Corsairs, who are now going to be absolutely damper noodles. Another load of blasting charges come in, explosive glory, as they actually kind of get pushed into the Ekron lines. But yeah, those Black Orc Corsairs certainly going to want him to be running for the hills. Sorcerers of Dark is going to be popping off another fat Soul Stealer, catching a ton of units here. Looks like, oh, is it going to make it in time? It is indeed. Dwarf Warriors, Ekron Miners, as well as the Skulder Guard, who probably will be finished off by this due to the presence of Lokir Felheart. However, the balance of power heavily in the DAWI favour at this point. If we take an overarching view of the battlefield, on this right-hand side, all the Dark Elf forces were forced off, and on the left-hand side, it looks like all the Dark Shards have been broken and are quite happily being escorted off by Slayers. Well, I say happily, Slayers want to die, so they're probably actually a bit annoyed that these Elves aren't giving them a fair fight. K9 Assassin is going to be pulling back, and it will be the Dark Elf Hero Corps, which is a very scary thing. I mean, Dark Elves, I've spoken about before, as being rather weak in the current game meta, but their hero cores are still disgustingly powerful. And it looks like the assassin is going to be fleeing from some miners, doesn't want to engage them yet. He's just going to be 360, throwing those shurikens at them, or I believe he's got a hand crossbow actually, doing some really nice damage into the miners, who may even break. And a lot of the DAWI forces are starting to lack on the leadership department. Can Lokir carry here? Only time will tell. Let's get some lovely close-ups of his animations as we're waiting for the rest of the Dwarf forces to engage. Lovely slicing attacks as he tries to carve his way through the thick armour of the Dwarven folk. The Sorceress being engaged in combat is slightly risky. She's a little bit more squishy than, of course, Lokir. Just hanging around nearby, doing a few attacks before falling back is probably the best way to go, unless she has another Soul Stealer lined up. The Assassin has managed to break and finish off the Skulder Guard, who have now completely shattered from the field of battle. And if this Assassin can just pick off units as they approach and allow Lokir to take the main damage, maybe there is hope just yet, although there's quite a few Slayers left on the field as well, which are going to be, of course, a huge problem here. K9 Assassin going to continue running here towards now the Ekron Miners, trying to break this pocket of DAWI strength. It looks like they will be able to break them, but of course with only 3 models on the field. It says 23, but I'm sure those guys are just broken. Yeah, they're over here, Dark Shards. With only 3 models on the field, it's going to be pretty damn hard to chase down and finish off a lot of these Dwarven forces. So let's fast forward a little bit as we do slowly come down to the final engagement. That Assassin's done really well so far and is consistently doing nice long-range damage as well, that handbow. Unfortunately, they now are tied up by a pretty much full health unit of Dragonback Slayers. Soul Stealer is going to be coming in just as the Sorceress dies, so going down a tiny bit late there. But yeah, Dragonback Slayers being so healthy are really going to be the nail in coffin here for the Dark Elf forces. Lokir Felheart does drop Dreaded Duelist, but the Assassin as well is relatively squishy. He's still an elf, and the Dragonbacks will fight to the death here. We have more Giant Slayers flooding in as well to the tree line to help support. Miners just vibing on the outskirts of the battlefield with the Dwarf Warriors, regaining their strength, taking a nice little breather, allow the Slayers to drain the sap the strength of the Dark Elf characters here before moving in to kill them. They do fight back to back, which is pretty badass in a shadowy forest. 2 mighty Dark Elf characters holding the line, but there is no Rohan to answer the call of the Dark Elves here. No allies, and being surrounded, I'm pretty sure they are done for. Looks like the K-Knight Assassin certainly thinks so, and is going to flee for his life. Lokir Felheart, made of sterner stuff, shall fight to the bitter end. As I say, his leadership does start to go down, then he's probably going to run for his life. But again, I don't blame him terribly often. The Ekron Miners are going to be starting to push up now from all sides to surround the enemy, as Dwarf Warrior is going to continue the pursuit of the Assassin to try and break him and finish him off. And down goes Lokir Felheart. A Pyrrhic victory for the forces of the DAWI. Fantastic game by both of these players with 2 really interesting builds, especially Ways. We'll do a breakdown in just a second, but I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, feel free to give the video a big old thumbs up. It super helps push the channel out to more people, and feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. We do drop Total War Warhammer content every single day. If you would like to support the channel in any other way, you can follow some links down below to my Patreon where you can support the channel, or if you are subscribed, you can become a channel member as well. If you'd like to see your replays up on the channel, feel free to join my Discord. There's a link down in the description below where you can submit replays, get involved in tournaments. We actually have a tournament tomorrow you can play in, which is a one-man tournament, so you submit a build and you stick with that build the entire tournament. It's going to be really good fun, and if you're a new player, it's a perfect time to jump in as well, as it won't be, too super competitive. But anyway, very well played to Wei and Blitzen. Had both these guys on the channel recently. I think we actually had a really cool Blitzen victory the other day, and his build was pretty damn fun. How can you not love anyone who brings Lokir Felheart? 111 kills is pretty impressive stuff. 2,800, about to say 28,000. 2,800 damage value is scary stuff, and 15,000 damage dealt. He certainly did good for the cause, especially by being on foot here. Now, if he was on his dragon, those breath attacks could have been really scary, but with so many slayers on the field, it could have been problematic. The Sorceress of Dark Magic, I'm not so convinced on just going for a Soul Steal. I think there is better spells. Even just getting a Beast Caster with a Manticore or something I think would have been better here, or going for something like a Pendulum. But, seeing Dark Magic is always quite cool as well. And she still did pretty good work, but again, not the craziest damage value across the board. The Assassin did rather well, 6,000 damage dealt, managed to finish off Belegar and bring him to his knees, as well as chase him off and supporting Lokir generally in the kind of one area that the Dark Elves really succeeded in quite nicely. Apart from that, the Blackheart Corsair is quite a nice answer to the Slayers themselves, but there simply wasn't enough of them to protect this heavy back line. Certainly expecting the Dwarfs to go a little bit more defensive here, where he can box them in, use a few troops just to protect his own line and try to outshoot the DAWI, which normally is a pretty decent tactic. Blaze of Blood Queen getting some lovely kills, lovely damage dealt, but not the best value. They were mainly fighting miners and dwarf warriors before getting dragged down by blasts and charges and so forth. And if we look at the bolt throwers, they really struggled. There was no good targets for them apart from maybe the Scalded Guard, who could simply spread out that formation, so they didn't take too much damage, and they got shut down by the scary dwarven cavalry of the Slayers. And Dark Shards as well suffered slightly, but a really nice fight back, to be honest. Good use of the characters kept him in the game. As for the forces of Wei, lovely to see Belegar and Felix together. They did unfortunately go for a little bit of a Leroy Jenkins approach and kind of dart straight after the Dark Elf leadership and into the heart of the build, and they got stomped for doing so. So I think being a little bit more conservative with them would have been better, but at the same time, it distracted the leadership core and allowed the rest of the dwarf build to succeed. So I guess it's a little bit of a gambit of trying to sacrifice his characters here. Apart from that, the miners did some pretty decent damage dealt across the board. Again, they're not up against elite infantry for the most part, so just doing some okay damage and damage value. Dwarf warriors as well, doing a pretty decent job. There's been a huge swarm of heavy metal to overwhelm the Dark Elves where possible. Ekra miners did perform very well, 900 damage value and 4,000 damage dealt. Pretty impressive stuff there. But the real MVPs here certainly were the Slayers, if you have a look across the board. Big kills from all of the Slayers, 8,700 damage dealt here with 1.5k damage value. Again, 1.5k damage value, 1.7 and only 600 on this one unit, but still 5,000 damage dealt is pretty tasty. So around the Slayers, certainly the MVPs, wrapping around the flanks, shutting down the Dark Shards and counter-skirmishing the enemy when they try to, peel off in different directions. Instead, chase with a Dwarf Warrior and the Slayer to help support each other. Really glorious play there for Wei, as well as the Scalded Guard, still doing pretty decent damage value. They are a very expensive unit, however, and were a little bit out of their element up against so much long range. But guys, hope you enjoyed. Until next time, peace, and as always, stay awesome.